Here he is, our Canucks reporter from Rogers Arena, where the Canucks held their official opening of training camp. And, well, you may hear some background noise because they're busy beavers over at Rogers Arena getting the rink ready for opening night. Hello, Jeff Paterson. How goes?
Yeah, it's going all right. I think you may be hearing noise because they're setting up for an Eagles concert in the lower bowl here. But you're not wrong, Matt, that there is construction that's been ongoing all off-season here. Complete renovation of the Canucks locker room, the coaches' offices. In fact, they're moving the coaches' offices across the hall down at ice level and, to a lesser degree, a new media area. So I don't know when this is going to get the great reveal because it's my understanding that it's very much a hard hat area back of house here still. And, of course, they're playing a game in this building on Sunday, so I think that they may have to improvise a little bit. I'm not sure what kind of locker room facilities they would use or whoever Calgary sends, but there is an NHL preseason game being played in this building on the weekend. But I think it's also a good thing that the Canucks start with a 5-game road trip because that's going to offer them a couple extra weeks to get the renovations completely finished, signed off, sealed, delivered, and they can take it from there once they get around to that home opener.
They're asking them to shower at home, I understand.
A shower and dress and then head to the rink.
Yes.
Not quite what the New York Islanders had to face as their rink was going, not quite what Arizona is facing this year, but quite right, Jeff, a 5-game roadie to start. Home opener is October 22nd, so a month from tomorrow against the Buffalo Sabres. And how about this? You know, training camp falls this year right as summer ends and autumn begins. Jeff, let's just start with schedule of events here this week for those who might be just engaging with hockey or wanting to know what the Canucks procedure will be for the rest of the week.
Yeah, so physicals today, a few of the principals met the media, including the head coach. The team is heading up to Whistler tonight. They're on the ice tomorrow morning in 3 groups, 2 NHL groups, and then essentially an AHL group and some of the free agent tryouts and others. And this is a little bit different this year in that there's supposed to be scrimmages each and every day starting on Thursday. So I think what you'll see is Group A would be a group of NHLers, Group B would be a group of NHLers. The first group on would go through its training camp sessions. The second group would join them. They would have a quick little warm-up, and then there would be a scrimmage, and then Group A would leave, maybe do some off-ice, dry land, some of the media obligations, and then Group B would stay out for its first day of training camp, and then the third group would come on later. So I think that's sort of the program, the way it's going to go Thursday and Friday. Saturday, my hunch is that the scrimmage will be a little bit more pronounced as sort of that end of training camp. And then they'll hit the highway back home. And again, they're playing here on Sunday, but they're also sending a split squad to Calgary for a game on Sunday. So they open with a bang on Sunday afternoon with a couple of games, and then they can ease into the rest of the preseason. There's a few days after Sunday without game action. Maybe they get down in some numbers. Maybe it allows Bruce Boudreau to get a better sense of exactly what he's working with. But, yeah, they're ready to go. Training camp on the ice. I believe the first group on the ice at 9:30 on Thursday morning.
We are getting a semblance of what Bruce Boudreau will conduct in his first training camp as well, in that for the second day in a row, he's talking about using all of his players in the positions that he's dreaming about on opening night. We mean opening night, on home opening night. Which is an interesting thing to be public about, and it's an interesting thing, period. It's an interesting strategy. Rather than give your stars a few different looks during the preseason to see what you think works best, he's going to go with what he thinks right off the bat and then try to marinate it, if you will.
Yeah, he said that this really isn't about experimentation, that he is trying to build chemistry from day one. And in fact, threw a little bit of a curveball, I thought, in as much as he said, look for Connor Garland to start on the left side. So for anybody that spent the offseason with wall charts and depth charts and trying to figure things out, Connor Garland, a right shot guy, But we did see at the end of last season, he moved over to the left, and Bruce Boudreau said he liked what he saw there. And so I think you're going to see Connor Garland lining up as a right shot left winger, which then means that maybe somebody that we hadn't thought about playing the right, maybe a Vasily Podkolzin, maybe he slides over. Tanner Pearson to me is a natural left winger. I don't think at this stage you're going to ask him to move to the other side, but it sounds like Kuzmenko is going to wind up on the left side, maybe Mikheyev. Perhaps they use him on right wing. Whatever the case, that was a little bit of a wrinkle that I wasn't expecting, but it sounds like you can expect Connor Garland to get a look starting on the left side here on day one of training camp.
So why don't we ask for your 2 cents? Blake and I have already done a video on this, and sorry to put you on the spot, Jeff, although you will have the advantage of putting Connor Garland on the left side. Who would you like to see as the wingers? Let's start with JT Miller.
Yeah, I mean, if we're assuming that he is their number one center and everything that Bruce Boudreau said in the offseason sort of leads you to think that that's the way the coach is leaning, I won't be shocked to see Tanner Pearson and Brock Besser as JT Miller's wingers. They played together right after Bruce took over. Remember, Brock got the Bruce bump. They played well together. And Tanner Pearson, just a solid pro through and through, straight lines, seems to complement the way that JT Miller plays. So that's kind of what I'm thinking we might see on day one of training camp. Now with Garland on the left side, though,
Garland play him with Paterson or with Bo?
Well, I'm starting to think that it's probably Paterson. I mean, I think Connor Garland's in their top 6, and Elias Paterson certainly is the next most productive setter that they've got. So maybe you're looking at Garland and Paterson. We've talked about Mikheyev and what his speed could do to back off defenders to create space for Elias Paterson. So, that's something that I guess I'd like to see. And then as I go here off the top of my head, that leaves you with Podkolzin on your third line, Bo Horvat,
Kuzmenko. Yeah.
Kuzmenko, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, again, I think you want to see what Kuzmenko has. And I thought it was interesting. I asked Bruce Boudreau, how are you going to evaluate this player? And one of the things he said is, shift length. He knows that guys that have come from the KHL quite often, they're out there taking a little longer twirl than they ought to get the most out of them. So I think that's one of the things that they're really going to stress with Kuzmenko. But he said in his limited dealings with him so far, this guy is nothing but smiles. He's excited. He's raring to go here. And I think in some ways it makes sense to kind of start him, ease him in a little bit as a third-line guy, see what you've got there. And again, you can tinker and make changes from that point, but that would make some sense, and put a countryman out there with him again to help with whatever communication issues maybe there are in the early going. So, yeah, I mean, now, when they step on the ice in Whistler on day one, I may be proven completely wrong, but, just off the top of my head here, as I think this through now with this information about Garland being over on the left side, that's kind of how I would see things shaking down.
Well, I hope you're not wrong, because that would make me wrong as well, Jeff. We have the exact same trios, although you're going to be more accurate with left and right wingers. The benefits of being the beat reporter here for the Vancouver Canucks. One of the things that I'll be watching for, and I think a lot of people will be watching for this year, is the head coach Bruce Boudreau and the management group on the same page this year. As we know, Jim Rutherford gave that indictment of the way they play in their own zone. As we know, Patrick Allvin set out to work with Bruce and the coaching staff, and even compose the coaching staff this year, so that they play with a little bit more structure. They play with a little bit more discipline. The practice habits get better. Bruce incorporates more data in his decision making. I'm not going to make a big deal out of this, because I can understand why both guys would say what they say this week. But Bruce talked about in his press availability today, he doesn't see why they can't take off where they left off last year. And Patrick Allvin said to Ian McIntyre, and I quote, it wasn't good enough last year because we didn't make the playoffs, so let's stop talking about it. So there you go. The coach's messaging last year, and with good reason. The general manager is messaging we've got to move on from last year, and likely with good reason as well.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting here today at the rink. The question was put to Bruce Boudreau, at the end of the season, the management talked about the need for more structure and tweaking the way you play. And Bruce was pretty quick to play the 57-game card, held up his record from last year and said, I think we did a lot of good things. So he said, it's more about execution than anything else. And it's not so much about the systems that they deploy. It's just, making sure that guys are in the right spots to receive the passes so that can help them break out of their own zone and then move to the attack. But Bruce certainly sounded like a guy that, pretty comfortable with the way that he coaches and the way that the team responded to him last year. And I think he does think that, that was enough of a sample size. It wasn't 15 or 20 games. It was 57. And they were good and they pushed hard. But ultimately, it's an 82-game schedule. And so there was a lot of talk here today, too, about the understanding of the importance of, putting their best foot forward, starting with day one of training camp, that they can't ease into the season, that they've got this road trip that we talked about. They can't fall behind. They saw last year. It's too hard a league to chase ultimately, and you're relying too much on your top end guys. As much as they would love to give Thatcher Demko a breather, they couldn't. And so they had to keep trotting him out, and ultimately they ground him into dust. Bo Horvat's injury wasn't really a result of fatigue. He got hit with a shot. Those things happen. But again, they were relying on those top end guys so much, shift in, shift out, period in, period out, night in, night out, that, if you can get ahead of the curve, it sets you up that maybe somewhere along the line you can come up for air. They didn't have that luxury last year. So I think they recognize that. And, I guess we'll see if they start to put these habits in place on day one tomorrow up in Whistler.
To me, it's good cop, bad cop, guys. I think that both of those leaders, Alvin and Bruce Boudreau, are talking to the players, are they not? The general manager trying to say, guys, you weren't good enough when we weren't here. Remember that. And the coach is trying to be good cop a little bit, saying, hey, you're capable. You prove that. And again, both sides are right, as you said, Matt, right? I mean, both sides have a valid viewpoint here of what happened last year.
But I think also both sides, you can't... With whom Patrick Allvin answers to, Jim Rutherford and Francesco Aquilini, last year isn't acceptable. And, Bruce, I think, as you say, he's got a message to the players some, and I think, you absolutely want to keep on what's going. Anyway, something we will monitor as the course of the year goes on. Let's get to the Bodog poll question, Jeff, and we played the clip of Bo Horvat in the opening segment, and, good on him for foreshadowing. You're going to hear this a lot this year, guys, when I get asked about it, that he's focused on being a Vancouver Canuck and making the Vancouver Canucks better and getting to the playoffs. Our Bodog poll question, will his expiring contract be a distraction this season? What says you?
Yeah, I think it will be. I mean, I think Bo's a pretty solid pro, and he's going to do everything that in his power to leave that on the sidelines. And when he hits the ice, he's going to do what he can to play for the Vancouver Canucks. But in a market like this one, and we've been down this road with a lot of guys. I mean, just think back recently, Alex Adler, will he waive? There were the player and the team can say what they want and they can act accordingly, but they don't control the questions that are going to be asked repeatedly. People want information. People want details. The insiders are working the back channels. People are trying to come up with the scoop about Bo Horvat and where this is going. And ultimately, is there a rift? And the longer it goes, you wonder about those types of things. And so, yes, I mean, for anybody to say no, absolutely no, it's not a distraction, they haven't been following this game and just the way the politics of this game goes. So it's going to be a topic until it's not a topic. He either puts pen to paper, or ultimately, if the team decides that it's got a different direction that it wants to pursue, you're telling me that that's not going to be a story angle, that all of a sudden his name comes up in trade talk later in this season? So, yes, I mean, on varying levels, it is a distraction.
And yet Horvat could still rise above, though, guys. See, Horvat could still have a great season even with all that happening, right? They don't have Miller proved that.
No, as we've just, it could be a distraction for everyone but Bo.
Yeah.
And of course, the other thing about this is the way hockey teams work now. This is how roster construction works now. You have X number of dollars. You are charged, like the task of a general manager now is, how do you allocate those dollars? And so Bo being the only unsigned guy, and particularly with this Kuzmenko wrinkle this year, because if he hits it out of the park, right, you're going to want to bring him back too. I think it's absolutely going to be a couple of the discussion points around the team, whether it infiltrates the locker room, whether it infiltrates and has any kind of effect on the proceedings. I'm skeptical about that, but I certainly know what the discussion will be around the club
I mentioned Miller there, JPat. He had strong words about his own learnings from the start last season. I wonder if we get a profane JT Miller if things don't go well off the bat here. He sounds like a guy committed to making sure that last year's start does not happen again. I'm sure they are all saying it, but boy, you felt it with JT Miller's comments today.
Yeah, I mean, there's always an honesty with JT Miller. You ask him a question, generally you're going to get an answer. A lot of times an unvarnished one. I thought it was interesting where he said, and he said this many times before, he doesn't assess his own performance based on the points. He wants to contribute. The points are great. But he said, I'm probably at a point now where, I have to trade some of the offense for a few more defensive plays that he does want to tidy up. But he also said in the same breath, I play a lot. I'm going to turn pucks over. And he kind of said it with a little bit of a wry smile because that has plagued him obviously in the past. And that's been some of the outbursts that we have seen. And it's been his reaction to those. But he's not wrong there. I mean, the guy plays so much in all situations that, there are going to be some mistakes that come his way. But he also said, he conceded that, repeating a 99-point season, that's going to be awfully, awfully difficult for him. So I do think that you're going to see a little bit more in the way of focus and attention to detail. And I'm not sure that they need 99 points from JT Miller. And we've talked about this in the past, too, that, if Elias Paterson can up his level of play, maybe you trade off 10 or 15 points from Miller for 10 or 15 points, an additional 10 or 15 points from Elias Paterson. It all comes out in the wash, and you're still getting a heck of a performance from JT Miller, but you're also seeing Elias Paterson take that next step in terms of his own point production. So, no, I mean, JT said all the right things as you would expect he would. I mean, he is truly one of the leaders on the ice, but also I think he recognizes his role in that locker room. He's a big voice. He carries some presence, and, I'm interested to see what does that look like. Is there a tweak to the way that he plays to tidy up things in his own zone that then can help him and the hockey club, get out of trouble in their own end, move to the attack, and that's where he can make his hay.
We have been so blessed in this market, not just with fantastic goaltenders in succession, Roberto Luongo, Corey Schneider, Jacob Markstrom, and now Thatcher Demko.
Ryan Miller in there, too.
Ryan Miller as well, absolutely. But the other thing that we have been lucky with our goaltenders, they have all been pretty candid communicators. I've enjoyed talking to all of them, and Thatcher Demko is very much following in that lineage. I find with Thatcher, and this was very much true with Schneider as well, Ryan and Roberto to a degree as well, I find they're educators on the position of goaltender. I learn things about goaltender and goaltending by listening to them. And I thought Thatcher was exceptional today in his answers, several of them. One of them about he tries to be close personally with the defensemen because they're the ones who are laying down and blocking shots and putting their good health on the line for him. And he said, I like the goal scorers too, but those defensemen are a little closer to home. I loved what he said about the best laid plans going into this year in terms of his workload. And I also loved what he had to say about he's no longer, and this was very honest, last year he was just interested in being a full-time starting goalie in the NHL. Now he's looking for a whole lot more. I thought it was a master class from Thatcher Demko in terms of how to speak to a hockey market and how to reveal what you're going through as an athlete that gets the
and how to sound like a starter. How to sound like a veteran starter.
That's exactly it. He sounded like a franchise goaltender today, Blake.
And I welcome that because I do think last year, and it comes with the territory in a market like this one, and last year was a screwy year. Obviously, we didn't have locker room access, but he was asked repeatedly after games to come and do, the post game at the podium, or if they're on the road, the Zoom. And there was a ton of success in the second half of the season. So a lot of times, he was still doing it after a victory, but he kind of looked worn down. He looked worn down at the end on the ice, but he looked worn down a little bit about answering the same question. He's not a guy that loves to talk about himself after games necessarily. He wants to believe that he can stop every shot. I mean, goaltenders, that's just the way that they're wired. But man, he just looked and sounded relaxed here today. And you're right, was way more of an open book. And when he is, he can be a fascinating guy. We know he's college educated, went to Boston College, studied, human performance and mechanics and kinesiology and all those types of things. Like, he's got a fascinating background and perspective, and I thought he brought a lot of that to the table today. So seems like he's in a good headspace. So he got married in the offseason. So it's a new Thatcher Demko, in life level that way. He said he came back to town early to work with Ian Clark. He's been on the ice an awful lot. He's working with Spencer Martin as well, trying to build that rapport. And so he just seemed like he was in a really good headspace, and that's a good sign for him and for the Vancouver Canucks, because we know they are going to need him if they're going to motor in the right direction this season.
In terms of who's left, we got to hear from Brock Besser, and Kuzmenko's proficient enough in English that we anticipate hearing from Kuzmenko at some point this week, Jeff? Do I have that right?
That's my understanding. And in fact, I thought maybe we would hear from the new Russian import today, but wasn't the case. So we'll try to catch up with him at Whistler if he's around and available. I mean, Mikheyev, he tried his best when he signed with the Canucks and conducted a Zoom. He's broken English there. Podkolzin, we know, has taken strides, but some of the social pieces that the Vancouver Canucks have put out involving Kuzmenko, again, big smile on his face. Like, he seems like a gregarious character that way. I'm not fully certain of his full command of English in terms of doing media, so we'll find out a little bit more about him. And yeah, Brock Besser, was an open book to Mike Russo of The Athletic, fascinating piece a week or 10 days ago, just about losing his father and all that that encompassed. But we haven't had a chance to talk to Brock here on the ground in Vancouver yet, but I'm sure that will happen over the course of the weekend up at Whistler.
Marvelous
that you are on the ground at NHL training camp tomorrow. I mean, it was a dry run last week in Penticton, but
Yep.
It's got to be fun. You're going to be watching these guys going through the paces, wearing Canuck logos tomorrow. It's finally started, Jeff.
Yeah, and we'll be able to check in from Whistler and find out how close we were with our depth charts of the forward grouping. So, yeah, I mean, that's some of the intrigue, I guess, defensive pairings as well, all this talk about moving lefties over to the right and all that kind of stuff. We'll start, it's been great fodder for the offseason, as it always is in a market like this one, but rubber hits the road, and we start to get some of those answers, and I thought it was interesting, too. I asked Bruce Boudreau about the opportunity for Jack Rathbone. Eyes kind of lit up and said he is in the mix. So, I thought that was, a little bit of just a nice bump for a young player that's got to put his best foot forward as well. But the coach certainly not closing any doors on a player like Jack Rathbone. That's what training camp, that's what the preseason is all about. And remember, last year, Jack Rathbone was trotted out every single game the Canucks played in the preseason. They gave him every opportunity.
That's right.
And he made the hockey club out of camp and played 9 games and then was sent to Abbotsford for the rest of the season. I don't imagine his workload will be that heavy in the preseason this time around, but again, preseason is for separating yourself from the pack, and I would think for any young player, you'd rather be in the lineup in the preseason than sitting in the press box. You cannot prove anything to the coaching staff when you're sitting up in the press box eating popcorn. You would rather be, you're a hockey player, you want to be out there playing the game.
I have yet to prove anything to head coaches eating popcorn in the press box, and I have tried mightily. So you're right on that front.
Until tomorrow, Jeff, take it easy, my friend.
All right, we'll check in from Whistler, guys.